They stopped returning my calls 3 weeks after the funeral. For the last 7 years, I was married to a woman named Caroline. We lived in a small coastal town in Maine, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business. Caroline grew up here. Her family owned the hardware store on Main Street for 3 generations. Her father, Robert, was a deacon at the church. Her mother, Judith, ran the historical society. Her brother, Michael, managed the store after their father retired. When Caroline and I met, I was an outsider. I'd moved to town for work, managing the regional office of a logistics company. I didn't have roots here. No family plots in the cemetery, no yearbook photos in the library archives, no last name that appeared on street signs. But Caroline loved me anyway. We married in the same church where her parents married, where her grandparents married. It was small, intimate, full of faces I barely knew, but who all seemed to know exactly who I was. The stranger who won Caroline's heart. For 7 years, I tried to belong. I showed up to town meetings. I volunteered at the Firehouse pancake breakfasts. I learned the names of every cashier at the grocery store. I wanted them to see me not as the outsider, but as Caroline's husband. As one of them. Caroline and I didn't have children. We tried for years, went through treatments, held our breath through appointments that ended in quiet car rides home. Eventually, we stopped trying. We told each other it was okay. We had each other. That was enough. And it was. Until the morning she didn't wake up. The doctors said it was an undiagnosed heart condition. A genetic defect, something that had been there her whole life, silent, waiting. She went to sleep beside me and simply never opened her eyes again. I found her just after dawn. I remember the way the light came through the curtains, soft and pale, the kind of light that should have meant the start of something. I shook her shoulder gently at first, then harder. I said her name. I called 911. I did CPR until the paramedics arrived and gently pulled me away. But she was already gone. The funeral was massive. The whole town showed up. People I'd never spoken to came through the receiving line, gripping my hand, telling me how sorry they were, how much Caroline meant to them, how she was one of the good ones. Her family stood beside me at the service. Robert gave the eulogy. Judith wept into a handkerchief. Michael put his hand on my shoulder and said, "We're here for you, brother." I believed them. For the first 2 weeks after the funeral, they called every day. Judith brought casseroles. Michael stopped by to check on me, to make sure I was eating, to ask if I needed anything. Robert came by to help me go through Caroline's things, to sit with me in silence when I couldn't find the words. But then slowly the calls stopped. At first, I thought they were just giving me space. Grief has its own rhythm. People pull back, not out of cruelty, but out of uncertainty. I told myself that was normal. But when I called Judith to ask if she wanted to go through Caroline's jewelry together, she didn't answer. I left a message. She didn't call back. When I texted Michael to see if he wanted to grab lunch, he replied 2 days later with a single sentence. Busy with the store. Sorry. When I stopped by the house to see Robert, Judith answered the door. She didn't invite me in. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and said, "Now's not a good time, Daniel." I stood there on the porch, confused, waiting for her to explain. She didn't. She just closed the door. That was 3 weeks after the funeral. I started noticing other things. At the grocery store, people who used to stop and chat would see me coming and suddenly remember something they needed in another aisle. At church, I sat in the same pew Caroline and I always sat in, but the people who used to greet us warmly now offered tight, polite smiles and looked away. One Sunday after the service, I overheard 2 women talking near the fellowship hall. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was just standing nearby, holding a cup of coffee, trying to decide whether to stay or leave. "It's just strange, don't you think?" one of them said. "What is?" "That he's still here. I mean, she's gone. What's keeping him?" The other woman lowered her voice. "Judith says he's been asking about the house." "The house?" "Caroline's house. Well, technically it's his now, but you know what I mean. It's been in their family for generations." There was a pause. "Do you think he's going to sell it?" "Judith's terrified he will. Can you imagine? That house, sold to some stranger? After everything." I set my coffee down and walked out. That night, I sat in the living room, the house dark except for the glow of the streetlight outside. I thought about what I'd heard. The house. Caroline's house. Our house. We'd lived here together for 7 years. I'd repaired the roof. I'd repainted the kitchen. I'd planted the garden in the backyard. The one Caroline loved, the one she used to sit in every evening with a book and a glass of wine. But to them, it wasn't mine. It was hers. And now that she was gone, I was just the man living in their daughter's house. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not because I wanted to fight. Not because I was angry. I called because I needed to understand what I was dealing with. I needed to know where I stood. The lawyer's name was Ellen Marsh. She was in her late 50s, sharp, efficient, the kind of person who didn't waste time on pleasantries. I met her in her office downtown, a small space above the bakery that smelled faintly of cinnamon rolls. I explained the situation. Caroline's death. The house. The family. Ellen listened without interrupting. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and folded her hands. "Do you have a will?" she asked. Caroline and I both did. We made them a few years ago. "And the house?" "It's in both our names. Joint tenancy." Ellen nodded. "Then it's yours. Automatically. No probate, no contest. When she passed, her share transferred to you." I felt a flicker of relief. "So they can't take it," Ellen said. "Not legally. But that doesn't mean they won't try." I looked at her. "What do you mean?" She sighed. "Small towns are complicated, Daniel. Family, legacy, history. It all matters more than the law sometimes. If they believe that house should stay in their family, they'll find ways to make your life difficult. Socially, emotionally, financially. They'll pressure you to sell it to them, or to leave, or to sign something you shouldn't. What should I do?" Ellen looked at me for a long moment. "That depends. Do you want to stay?" I didn't answer right away. Did I want to stay? Without Caroline, this town felt hollow. Every street corner reminded me of her. Every shop, every face, every sound. But leaving felt like erasing her. Like admitting she was gone. "I don't know," I said finally. Ellen nodded. "Then my advice is this. Don't make any big decisions yet. Don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. And if they push, come see me." I left her office and walked through town, hands in my pockets, trying to make sense of it all. That evening, Michael showed up at the house. I answered the door, surprised. He hadn't called. Hadn't texted. He just stood there on the porch, hands in his jacket pockets, looking uncomfortable. "Hey," he said. "Hey." There was a pause. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He walked into the living room, but didn't sit. He stood near the window, looking around like he was cataloging everything. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I'm okay." He nodded, but he didn't look at me. "Mom wanted me to talk to you." There it was. "About what?" "The house." I waited. "She's been thinking," Michael said slowly, "that maybe it would be easier for you if you didn't have to deal with it. You know, all the upkeep, the memories. It's a lot. I can handle it." "I know. I'm just saying, if you wanted to sell, we'd be interested. Keep it in the family. We'd give you a fair price." I looked at him. "What's a fair price?" He shifted his weight. "We'd have to get it appraised, but, market value. Maybe a little under, since it'd be a family sale. Under market value. Just to make it easier. No realtors, no fees." I felt something tighten in my chest. This wasn't about making things easier for me. This was about getting the house back. "I'm not selling," I said. Michael's jaw tightened. "Daniel, come on. Be reasonable." "I am being reasonable. This is my home." It was Caroline's home. And she was my wife. We stood there, the air thick with everything unsaid. Finally, Michael shook his head. "You don't get it, do you? You're not from here. You don't understand what this place means to us. I lived here for 7 years. That's not the same." He turned and walked to the door. Before he left, he looked back at me. "You should think about it," he said. "This town has a long memory." Then he was gone. I stood in the empty living room, my pulse hammering in my ears. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the conversation, the look on Michael's face, the threat buried in his words. This town has a long memory. I realized then that this wasn't going to stop. They weren't going to leave me alone. They were going to push and push until I either gave them what they wanted or left. And I realized something else. I wasn't going to do either. If they wanted me gone, they were going to have to work for it. And in the process, they were going to show everyone exactly who they were. I just had to wait and watch. The next 3 months were a study in isolation. It started with small things. The barista at the coffee shop, who used to know my order by heart, suddenly couldn't remember it. The guy who ran the hardware store, Michael's store, told me they were out of stock on something I could see sitting on the shelf behind him. At church, People stopped shaking my hand during the passing of the piece. They'd nod politely, then turn to someone else. I started keeping a journal. Not because I was planning anything, but because I wanted to remember. I wanted a record of how it felt to be erased. One Sunday, I arrived at church to find someone sitting in the pew Caroline and I had always shared. An older couple I didn't recognize. When I politely mentioned that we usually sat there, the man looked at me coldly. "There's no assigned seating," he said. I sat somewhere else. After the service, I saw Judith talking to the couple. She glanced at me, then quickly looked away. I wrote it down. At the grocery store, I overheard the cashier talking to the woman in front of me. I heard he's refusing to sell the house. Can you believe it? After everything they did for him. I stood there, waiting to pay for my milk and eggs, and said nothing. I wrote it down. One evening, I came home to find a letter taped to my front door. It wasn't signed. It was printed on plain paper, no return address. It said, "You don't belong here. Leave while you still can." I took it inside, photographed it, and filed it in a folder I'd started keeping. Then I went to see Ellen. She read the letter, her face impassive. "This is harassment." "I know. You could file a police report." "Would it help?" She set the letter down. "In a town like this? Probably not. But it would create a record." I thought about it. "Not yet." Ellen looked at me carefully. "What are you waiting for?" "I'm waiting for them to show me who they really are." She leaned back in her chair. "And then I'll decide what to do." She didn't ask any more questions. If you're finding this story compelling, consider subscribing. There's more to come. Over the next 2 months, the pressure increased. The property taxes on the house came due. I went to pay them at the town office, and the clerk, a woman named Diane who had been friendly to me for years, barely looked at me. "That'll be $1,800, she said. I handed her my check. She looked at it, then looked at me. "We don't accept checks anymore." "Since when?" "New policy." There was no sign. No notice. I looked around. Another man was paying with a check at the counter next to me. "He just used a check," I said. Diane's face hardened. "Cash or card?" "That's the policy." I paid with my card, hands shaking with quiet rage. I wrote it down. One night, I woke to the sound of glass breaking. I went downstairs to find my front window shattered, a rock sitting in the middle of the living room floor. I called the police. Officer Hayes showed up 20 minutes later, the same officer who had directed traffic at Caroline's funeral. He looked at the window, wrote something in his notebook, then looked at me. "Any idea who might have done this?" "No." "You have any enemies?" I almost laughed. "I don't think so." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes kids get bored. Probably nothing personal." He left without dusting for prints, without asking neighbors if they'd seen anything. I swept up the glass, boarded up the window, and added the incident to my folder. By now, the folder was thick. I had letters, receipts, photos, time-stamped journal entries, a list of every cold shoulder, every snide comment, every act of exclusion. I hadn't done anything with it yet, but I was building something. Then one Saturday morning, I received a certified letter. It was from the town's code enforcement office. The letter stated that my property was in violation of multiple town ordinances. Overgrown grass, peeling paint, an unapproved fence. None of it was true. I'd mowed the lawn 2 days ago. The paint was fine. I didn't even have a fence. But the letter said I had 30 days to remedy the violations or face fines. I drove to the code enforcement office. The officer, a man named Carl, sat behind his desk, arms crossed. "I don't have any of these violations," I said. "I have photos. Can I see them?" "They're in the file." "Can I see the file?" Carl looked at me for a long moment. "You can file an appeal." "How do I do that?" "Fill out a form. Costs $50. Takes 6 weeks to process." I stared at him. He stared back. I left without saying another word. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the letter in front of me, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to fight them the way they expected. I was going to let them bury themselves. I started documenting everything with precision. I mowed the lawn every week and took time-stamped photos. I measured the grass height with a ruler. I photographed the paint, the windows, the roof, every angle of the house. I kept copies of every utility bill, every tax payment, every receipt. I recorded conversations when I could. I saved voicemails. I printed emails. I didn't confront anyone. I didn't argue. I just collected. And I waited. Then one Sunday, Robert approached me after church. He didn't say hello. He just walked up to me in the parking lot, hands in his pockets, face hard. "You need to leave," he said. I looked at him. "This is my home." "It's not your home. It's Caroline's home. And she's gone. She was my wife. You didn't deserve her." The words hit me like a fist. I stood there, staring at him, this man who had given a eulogy about love and loss, who had called me son at the funeral, who now looked at me like I was a stain on his daughter's memory. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," Robert said. "Sell us the house. Take the money. Start over somewhere else. Somewhere you actually belong." I took a breath. "No." His face darkened. "You're going to regret this." He walked away. I got in my car, drove home, and wrote down every word. The final break came in early spring. I received a notice from the town council. They were considering a zoning change that would reclassify my property from residential to commercial. If it passed, I would be required to either bring the property up to commercial code, an expense that would cost tens of thousands of dollars, or sell. The hearing was in 2 weeks. I knew then what this was. This was the final push. I called Ellen. "They're trying to force you out," she said. "But here's the thing. Spot zoning, changing the classification of a single property without a broader plan, is illegal in Maine. If you can prove this is targeted, you have a case." "How do I prove it?" "You show a pattern of harassment. You show intent. You show that every action they've taken has been designed to pressure you into selling." I looked at the folder on my desk, now over 100 pages thick. "I can do that," I said. The town council hearing was held in the old meeting hall on Main Street. The room was packed. I recognized most of the faces. Judith and Robert sat in the front row. Michael stood near the back, arms crossed. The council president, a man named Thomas, called the meeting to order. "We're here to discuss a proposed zoning amendment for 47 Maple Street," he said. That was my address. Thomas went through the details. The property, he said, was being considered for reclassification due to its location near the commercial district and the potential for future development. It was a lie. My house was surrounded by other residential properties. There was no commercial district nearby. But no one in the room challenged him. When it was time for public comment, Robert stood. "I support this amendment," he said. "The property in question has been a point of concern for the neighborhood. The current owner has shown a lack of investment in maintaining the property and has resisted efforts to integrate into the community." More lies. But people nodded. Then it was my turn. I stood, walked to the front, and placed my folder on the table in front of the council. "My name is Daniel Archer," I said, "and I'm here to tell you that this amendment is not about zoning. It's about forcing me to sell my home." The room went silent. I opened the folder. Since my wife's death 7 months ago, I have been systematically harassed, excluded, and targeted by members of this community. I have documented every incident. I pulled out the first page. On November 14th, I was denied service at the town office and told I couldn't pay my property taxes by check, despite the fact that the person next to me was allowed to do so. I pulled out another. On December 3rd, my front window was broken. The responding officer filed no report and conducted no investigation. Another. On January 10th, I received a code enforcement letter citing violations that do not exist. I have photos proving compliance. I kept going. Letter after letter. Incident after incident. By the time I finished, the council members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "This amendment," I said, "is the final step in a coordinated effort to push me out of a home I legally own. And if you pass it, I will file a lawsuit against this town for harassment, discrimination, and illegal spot zoning." I closed the folder. "I'm not leaving," I said. "And if you keep pushing, everyone will know exactly what you did." I walked out of the room. 3 days later, the zoning amendment was quietly withdrawn. No explanation. No announcement. It simply disappeared from the agenda. Michael stopped by the house the following week. He didn't come inside. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, looking tired. "You won," he said. "I didn't want to win. I just wanted to be left alone." He nodded slowly. "Mom and Dad, they're not going to apologize." "I know. They really loved her. So did I." Michael looked at me for a long moment. "I know." He turned to leave, then stopped. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry." I didn't say anything. He walked away. I still live in the house on Maple Street. I still go to the grocery store, the coffee shop, the church. People still avoid me. Some whisper. Some stare. But no one bothers me anymore. I don't know if they're afraid of another lawsuit, or if they're ashamed, or if they've simply moved on to someone else to exclude. I don't really care. I stay because this is where Caroline and I built a life. This is where we planted the garden. This is where we talked about the future, even when we knew it might not include children, even when we knew we'd have to face loss someday. I stay because leaving would mean letting them erase her. And I'm not going to let that happen. Some nights, I sit in the living room with the lights off, and I think about how close I came to walking away. How easy it would have been to sell the house, take the money, and start over somewhere else. But I didn't. Not because I'm stubborn. Not because I wanted revenge. I stayed because I knew that if I left, they would have won. And more importantly, they would never have had to see what they'd become. People talk about justice like it's something loud. A courtroom drama. A public shaming. A moment of reckoning. But sometimes justice is quieter than that. Sometimes it's just refusing to disappear. Sometimes it's making them look at what they did, not by shouting, but by simply still being there. I don't know if they'll ever admit what they did was wrong. I don't know if they'll ever apologize. But I know this. Every time they drive past this house, they have to remember. Every time they see me at church, at the store, on the street, they have to remember that they tried to break me. And I'm still here. That's not revenge. That's just the truth. If this story stayed with you, if it made you think about the invisible battles people fight just to hold on to what's theirs, leave a comment below. I read them all. And if you want more stories that dig into the uncomfortable truths we don't often talk about, subscribe. Thanks for listening.